Before we talk about diabetic foot ulcers, let me ask the question, what is one of the most consumed substances on earth is sitting in your cup right now? I haven't as yet, but I need to because it's really early in the morning. But today we're going to trace the coffee's journey from the mountains of Ethiopia to the bedside of a possible diabetic patient and asking a fascinating question. Can your daily caffeine habit affect your ability to heal? So, in today's episode of Diabetic Foot Files, we're going to separate the myths from the science and explore how caffeine affects the blood vessels. And I think a lot of people do know because they feel that flush, inflammation, oxygen delivery, sleep, stress, and other blood sugar, as well as your wound healing. So imagine two patients with the exact same diabetic foot ulcer. One drinks 4 cups of coffee a day, and the other one avoids caffeine completely. Who heals faster? Surprisingly, the answer isn't straightforward as you might think. So, what is caffeine? Caffeine is a naturally occurring stimulant found in coffee, tea, cocoa, chocolate, energy drinks, soft drinks, and some medications. I do not do any of them. I'm just like any other student. When I was in college, I did discover energy drinks, and yeah, we'll never be doing that ever again. I stopped the first week of energy drinks because those things made me feel like it felt like your heart, the heart palpitations were crazy. And so, an average cup of coffee has about 80 to 120 milligrams of caffeine. A lot of energy drinks have 150 to 300 milligrams of caffeine. So that's why it feels like you already ran when you didn't. So imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that the second most traded commodity on earth after oil never existed. So let's say there's no morning coffee, no Starbucks. Everybody loves Starbucks, right? No espressos, no cappuccinos, no caffeine powered hospital shifts, right? So today, more than 2 billion cups of coffee are consumed every single day. Yet, someone trying to heal from with a diabetic foot ulcer, the innocent morning cup may have certain aspects affect certain aspects of their health while quietly interfering with other aspects of their life as well. Because we know it can affect your sleep, it can affect a lot of different things. So we're gonna dive into it. So, what did humans do before coffee existed? Humans searched for stimulants for thousands of years. I guess everybody's a overachiever. They just want to fight the fatigue. And I mean, honestly, what do you do to fight the fatigue? You can exercise, that helps, but exercise also helps you sleep faster, So, but certain things help you stay awake. But ancient civilizations use things like cacao, tea, cola nuts, garanja. I hope I'm saying that right, and cocoa leaves to help fight the fatigue. And coffee was actually one of the last major stimulants discovered. I'm sure there's others, but I think maybe they stopped at coffee, right? So a legend called Kaldi. So in 1850 AD in Ethiopia, a goat herder named Kaldi, so Kaldi, noticed something unusual. His goats became energetic after eating these bright red cherries or bright red berries, okay, from a shrub. And instead of sleeping, they were dancing, pretty much like dancing goats. And the goats jumped around the mountain all night. And Kaldi brought the berries to the local monks, and the monks initially believed the berries were evil. According to legend, they threw them into the fire. And then something remarkable happened. The roasted beans released an incredible aroma because who doesn't love the smell of freshly brewed coffee? It smells great. And the monks scooped the beans up from the fire, crushed them, and poured hot water over them. So they kind of contradicted themselves just because it smelled good and accidentally brewed the first coffee. Whether this is true or not, Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee. So coffee spreads through Ethiopia, Yemen, and Araba. And where there were Sufi monks, drank it to stay awake during nighttime prayers. And in the 1400s, coffee houses appeared, and they became centers for politics, science, philosophers, medicine, and business. And people called these places where the people drank coffee the school of the wise. And eventually, coffee reached Turkey, Italy. Oh, the Italians with their coffee, great. England, France, and the Americas. And by the 1700s, it became one of the world's most favorite beverages. I do love a good coffee, let's be honest. So, when it comes to coffee and medicine, some people believe it cured headaches. I mean, for me, sometimes it gives me a headache. Some people thought it could cure depression, fatigue, indigestion, but other people believe it caused infertility, it caused insanity and weakness. So the debate still continues, okay? But where does it come from? Remember, we talked about this red berry. So it's a fruit. Coffee comes from fruit. And most people don't realize coffee beans are actually the seeds from the fruit. And the fruit is called a coffee cherry. And inside there is two green beans. And the growing conditions for the coffee berry, is tropical climate, volcanic soil, mountain elevation, and major producers are Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia, Ethiopia, and Honduras. So how is coffee made? They grow the cherries, they harvest the ripe cherries, they remove the fruit. This can be done by washing, drying, or honey processing. They dry the beans and then roast them, and the green beans transform into these beautiful, yummy brown coffee beans. I love coffee ice cream, and roasting it creates this 800 aromatic compounds, okay? Yeah, the smell of coffee is amazing. Remember what's Folgers say? The best part of waking up is Folgers. The younger generation don't understand how easy life used to be because it was so easy. Seeing a new Folgers commercial used to be like, that was the new deal. That was like the, highlight of the day. Oh, see what Folgers did because Folgers had some really great commercials back then, okay? But what is caffeine? So caffeine is actually a natural pesticide. So plants that produce caffeine, it actually kills insects. And humans simply discovered that it made us feel amazing. Chemically, it belongs to a group called methylxanthines, okay? And how does caffeine work? So it blocks the adenosine receptors. So normally adenosine. Right now, I'm not pronouncing that right, but adenosine promotes relaxation, sleep, blood vessel dilation in many tissues. And blocking these receptors increase the alertness and stimulates the release of catecholamines such as adrenaline. So what happens after drinking coffee? So within 15 to 45 minutes, caffeine enters your bloodstream. It crosses your brain, and there it blocks the adenosine. And adenosine normally tells your brain, "Hey, I'm tired." But caffeine blocks that signal, and what you feel, "Hey, I'm awake. I'm not tired." Scratch that, right? That's what caffeine does. Scratch that. I feel awake, alert, and energetic. So, what else happens? Caffeine increases adrenaline, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So, your heart rate increases, blood pressure rises slightly, fat breaks down, increase, mental focus improves, and reaction time improves. Side note that there's this, I think it's a Brazilian coffee. I can't remember the exact name, but yeah, that coffee is intense. I had it one time, and one thing about me, I'm a very like I can drink more than one cup of coffee after each other. And yeah, that was one of the biggest mistakes of my life because never again. I had to look. I was like palpating like crazy in my chest. I was sweating and I was like, let me look at this coffee. And I was like, oh, this is a different type of coffee. And it was a Latin type of coffee and it was very, very, very strong. I can't remember the name, but I think people would know what it is. So you have to also remember that coffee contains more than just caffeine. So, coffee contains over 1,000 biologically active chemicals, including chlorogenic acid, polyphenols, antioxidants, magnesium, potassium, and niacin. And these compounds may actually reduce inflammation in some individuals. Now, caffeine and blood flow. So, everybody knows it does affect your blood flow. So, one of the major concerns is vasoconstriction. Caffeine can temporarily narrow certain blood vessels. So, it reduced skin blood flow in some studies, causes temporary reduction and it's usually quite mild in healthy individuals. I'm not sure if they tested this in diabetic patients, but remember our diabetic patients who have peripheral arterial disease or microvascular disease, even these small reductions matter when it comes to these individuals. And, although caffeine can temporarily alter the blood vessel tone for a diabetic patient who has PAD, already limited circulation is often a bigger concern than the coffee itself. So, maintaining healthy blood flow through good diabetic management, smoking cessation, exercise when appropriate, and vascular care has much a larger impact on healing than moderate coffee consumption alone. But larger population studies suggest that people who drink coffee unsweetened coffee have a lower long-term risk of developing type 2 diabetes. This is what the study said, okay? Although this doesn't prove that coffee is not a direct cause. I don't think it is, in my opinion, because they would have already found that out, I think. Possible reasons are the antioxidant effects, improved insulin sensitivity in some people over time, and then healthier lifestyle patterns among regular coffee drinkers. However, acute caffeine intake can temporarily reduce insulin sensitivity in some individuals, meaning that their blood glucose may rise than more after a meal if they have caffeine intake recently. Now, oxygen delivery. So we know healing requires oxygen and glucose in our immune cells, and anything that reduces tissue perfusion can theoretically slow healing. So, however, the evidence when it comes to this and caffeine is quite mixed. Inflammation. So we already know caffeine has these complex effects. So low to moderate doses of caffeine may reduce some inflammatory signaling but lower oxidative stress in certain settings as well. But excessive intake of caffeine may increase stress hormone release as well as affect the inflammatory balance. Now, when it comes to the fibroblasts we know produce collagen, the extracellular matrix, and help with our scar tissue. And some laboratory studies suggest high concentrations of caffeine can reduce fibroblast proliferation as well as collagen synthesis. However, like I said, these experiments they expose the cells to a much higher level than what can be achieved by just drinking coffee alone. So these findings do not directly reflect everyday caffeine consumption of a person who drinks coffee. And like I said, with the collagen production, so very high caffeine exposure in these experimental models have been associated with reduced collagen formation, but the clinical relevance remains uncertain. And then blood sugar. Coffee itself contains almost no sugar, but a lot of people like to add sugar, syrup, creamers, whipped cream to their coffee. We already know Starbucks. I when I was in college, I definitely did gain the freshman 15 because I had Starbucks every day. I had a frappuccino every day. And yeah, I haven't had a frappuccino since, okay? Because once I got home and my uncle told me, "Wow, you look like you gained the freshman 15." Yeah, no, not doing that again. Okay? So everybody knows Gabby doesn't do frappuccinos no more. Okay? But these additions, like the sugar, the syrups, the creamers, the whipped cream, can worsen the glucose control. And caffeine can temporarily, like we said, reduce the insulin sensitivity in some people. Now, sleep. We did a whole episode on sleep. Sleep is extremely important when it comes to healing. Our growth factors are increased when we're sleeping. So, poor sleep, we already know caffeine keeps you alert. So, everybody's done pulled a all-nighter with a bunch of caffeine, okay? I can bet on almost every medical student has done that, okay? We've had to have coffee so that we can pull an all-nighter and study everything we need to do, okay? Even though we know that that's not the best thing, we still do it. But poor sleep, we know, can increase your cortisol, reduce your growth hormone, reduce your immune function, and delayed collagen production. One thing I always got during the summer in college, I would always get very sick after I was done with my exams because I wouldn't be sleeping during those weeks at all, like rarely slept. And so when I got home, I would always get a cold and always just be sleeping for pretty much almost a whole month because I wasn't sleeping well and I was drinking a lot of caffeine, mostly coffee because I didn't do energy drinks after my little brush with death with one of them. And yeah, so caffeine late, taking it late does disrupt your sleep. And, wound healing can suffer indirectly with lack of sleep. And like we said, it does increase your adrenaline and your noradrenaline. So these hormones, adrenaline, right? These increase your heart rate, raise your blood pressure, and temporarily raise your blood glucose in some patients. So chronic excessive stimulation is generally not ideal for tissue repair. Now, dehydration, because it's hot, okay, and everybody's getting dehydrated right now, okay? Like I said, this heat is different, okay? Feels like the world is cooking on its own. So, current evidence suggests that moderate coffee intake contributes to daily fluid intake, and that is not significantly dehydrating in habitual coffee drinkers. Sorry, but hydration does remain extremely important. I did a whole episode on it when it comes to wound healing. Now, our antioxidants. So we know coffee contains the phenols and other antioxidants. These compounds reduce oxidative stress, which is important because chronic wounds often exist in an environment of excessive oxidative damage. Now, peripheral neuropathy. Limited research when it comes to peripheral neuropathy and caffeine. Okay, so I'm not even going to cover that. Infection. Okay, there's no evidence that shows caffeine treats anything like bacterial biofilm or osteomyelitis. You know, I don't think it does. I think it causes more harm than good when it comes to that. And then, energy drinks. We already know energy drinks are high sugar. I just wouldn't recommend it to any diabetic patient. It will increase your blood pressure. It will make you way too alert. It's too much sugar, syrup. Everything about it is artificial, right? So I think it's a very poor choice for patients who have diabetes and chronic wounds. What about green tea? Green tea has less caffeine, but also, green tea is caffeinated. So you have to weigh your options. That's why it's so good to go to a nutritionist. I would just go to a nutritionist. Write down your daily routine of what you eat, what you drink, and discuss these with your nutritionist and figure out a good healthy medium and understand what is causing hindrance and what is actually helping your wound healing, okay? So, what else does the research say? Moderate caffeine intake has not been conclusively shown to impair diabetic foot ulcer healing. Very high caffeine exposure has shown to have adverse effects on wound healing cells in a laboratory setting. And, caffeine has showed indirect effects with things like poor sleep, increased stress hormone, and these sugary coffee beverages. Okay. And then individual factors such as peripheral arterial disease, glycemic control, and overall health likely have greater impact on wound healing than just moderate coffee consumption. So, what's the $1 million question? Does coffee can it delay your wound healing? Honestly, it depends. Coffee isn't itself automatically harmful to wound healing, but several mechanisms of it do deserve attention. And, potential ways excessive caffeine can slow your healing by, like I said, reduce sleep, which impairs your tissue quality, and your healing ability, temporary narrowing the blood vessels, higher stress level hormones, elevated blood glucose in some patients. Let's say you're doing the sugary drinks, dehydration. If fluid intake is inadequate, patients you really do like to substitute coffee for water, right? They'll be like, everybody wants to get a morning coffee, right? Instead of drinking a nice cup of water, fresh cup of water, they'll drink coffee, right? Because it's a habit is habitual for people. And then it does reduce your appetite as well. And we know nutrition and eating the right things like protein is very helpful for wound healing. So we don't want our patients to eat less and be malnourished. Okay. We want you to eat the right things at the right time. And another thing is, I just don't like when my patients are like, oh, I'd only eat once a day. That's not what I want you to do. I want you to eat just the right things. You can eat it multiple times a day, but I want you to eat the right things. And, the people who have the continuous glucose monitor, they'll be able to see what elevates their blood sugar and what doesn't. But like I said, I would leave it to the nutritionist and let the nutritionist help you understand what is the best thing for you. So what are some alternatives? I would speak to my nutritionist about this, but things like green tea, herbal teas, there's something called golden milk, which is like turmeric, ginger, cinnamon, matcha. I honestly, matcha is something new. It seems like a new trend. I haven't had it. I always say you can't go wrong with water, but there is something called water poisoning when people do anything in excess, okay? But in closing, coffee isn't a villain, it's nor is it a miracle. Well, it's a miracle if you're trying to pull an all-nighter, okay? It helps. Coffee helps, okay? Let's be honest. But it's a tool. And for many patients with diabetes, moderate unsweetened coffee can fit into their healthy lifestyle. But I would speak to my nutritionist about this. I would ask my doctor about this, my PCP and my endocrinologist. Do you think coffee is good for me? Or maybe cup of coffee a day, things like that. But if it's spiking your blood sugar, especially after the coffee, or it's affecting your sleep is suffering, or if it replaces your actual nutrition that could help you rebuild tissue, this becomes an obstacle that will impede your healing. And we know a diabetic foot ulcer doesn't just heal because one food or one drink. It's a whole plethora of things that need to be done for a diabetic ulcer to heal. And healing depends on the entire system: blood sugar control, circulation, nutrition, infection management, pressure release, sleep, and consistent wound care. So the question is, and should I drink coffee? The better question is the daily coffee drinking habit helping or hindering everything my body needs for me to heal? And hopefully that helps shift perspective when it comes to coffee and caffeine. And this is Diabetic Foot Files. Happy July 4th. I hope everybody's having a great one. And take care of your feet because they take care of you.